In this lecture here, we're going to start talking about quadratic equations. So one of the objectives, or the objectives in this lecture, well, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what exactly is a quadratic equation. Okay, that'll be the first thing. Okay. And then what I'm going to do over this video and then a number of other videos, okay, I'm going to break these objectives up. I'm going to talk about different methods for solving quadratic equations. So different methods for solving quadratic equations. So the first one we're going to talk about is solve quadratic equations by factoring. That's going to be this video here. And this is going to be the most important, or this should be like the one you should always go for. Okay, you should try to solve by factoring. Okay, so this is if you can solve by this method, you're going to use this method. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this up with a number of other videos that explain how to solve quadratic equations by using the square root property, solve quadratic equations by completing the square, solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, and then also talk about use what's called the discriminant, which is going to be part of the quadratic equation or the quadratic formula. You'll see that in the coming lecture. Okay, to determine the number of solutions. And then what I'll do at the end here is I'll just put a few extra problems up there and talk about the most efficient method to use when solving a quadratic equation. Okay, so in this lecture here, let's first start off by talking about what exactly is a quadratic equation. So a quadratic equation in x, now it can be any variable, or it doesn't just have to be the variable x. Is an equation that can be written in the general form of this. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. This is this a, this b, and this c. Okay, these are real numbers. They're going to be numbers like 5, -2, 3, things like that. Just so much as long as a does not equal 0. Okay, b and c can be 0. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. But a cannot be 0. Okay, so a quadratic equation is x is also called a second degree polynomial equation in x because the degree is the highest exponent. Just remember that. So if you look here, right, the highest exponent is 2, so this is a second degree polynomial equation. All right, so what I want to do in all these lectures now is talk about how you solve equations of this form, so these quadratic equations. So one of the key principles we'll use, and this is going to help us to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, is to apply what's called the zero product principle. And it states this: if the product of two algebraic expressions is 0, okay, then at least one of the factors is equal to 0. So if you ever see something that looks like this, if you have a times b is equal to 0, then you have two possible solutions. Either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0, okay? So what I'm going to show you here now is how you can apply this zero product principle to solve equations by factoring. Okay, so if necessary, the first thing you're going to do is rewrite the equation in the general form ax squared plus bx plus c. All you're going to do is you're going to move all non-zero terms to one side. Okay, so you want the right-hand side of the equation to be equal to 0. Okay, equal to 0. Step 2, you're going to factor completely, and you're going to notice when you factor, right? So when you factor, you take a polynomial and you break it down into the product of simpler terms, and so we're going to factor completely. Then we're going to apply this zero product principle. Okay, so you're going to see you're going to have something like a times b is equal to 0. Then you're going to have either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. You're going to solve the equation. You're going to see you're going to have two equations right here. A is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. You're going to solve this, and then you're going to check your solution. So I'm just going to check the first one here to show you that it works. And then we're just going to assume going forward, and at least in this lecture, that I solved it correctly. Okay, so let's solve by factoring. I'll start with a very, very simple one. Let's look at x squared minus 25x is equal to 0. All right, so notice you have it set equal to 0. Perfect. You have a squared term. Okay, so what you're going to do All right, we've got it in this general form right here. We're going to factor completely. All right, and I'm sorry, make this 5, not 25. Sorry about that. X squared minus 5x is equal to 0. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to factor completely. So notice what I can factor out here. I can just factor out an x, and then I'm left with x minus 5 is equal to 0. Notice how I have something times something equals 0. Okay, so this right here is my a, and this right here is my b, and it's equal to 0. So then your solution is either a is equal to 0, so either x is equal to 0, or this second part, x minus 5, is equal to 0. So this is already solved. So what we're saying here is one solution is x is equal to 0. Here I'm going to add 5 over. And I have another solution. X is equal to 5. So for my equation, this x squared minus 5x is equal to 0. The solution is that x is equal to 0 or x is equal to 5. What I'm saying here is both of these values will solve this equation. And let's check to verify that. So to check, you're going to plug this in. So I'm going to plug 0 in. So I have 0 squared minus 5 times 0. You know what? Yes, that does equal 0. Works out perfectly. How about this one? X is equal to 5. So I'm going to have 5 squared minus 5 times 5. Does that equal 0? Well, this is 25 minus 25. Yes, yes, it does equal 0. Boom, so it works out perfectly. So all you're going to do is you're just going to factor completely, all right? Then you're going to have something times something equals 0, set those two things equal to 0, and solve. All right, let's do another one, okay? Let's look at 2x squared minus 8x is equal to 0. All right, well, notice I have a second degree, so it's equal to 0, so I'm going to factor. So the greatest common factor here is 2x, and I'm left with x minus 4. So I have something times something equals 0. So either 2x is equal to 0, or x minus 4 is equal to 0. We'll divide by 2 here. One solution is x is equal to 0. Add 4 here. And another solution is that x is equal to 4. So we got it. So you just solve by factor. Once you factor this, it's very, very easy. It solves pretty straightforward. Let's try this one. Let's give you a trinomial now. Let's look at x squared plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. So it's a trinomial. So what two numbers multiply to 6, sum to 5? Well, that's 3 and 2. So this is going to factor into x plus 3 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. So notice I have something times something equals 0. So either x plus 3 is equal to 0 or x plus 2 is equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 3 over. So either x is equal to minus 3 or I'm going to subtract the 2 over or x is equal to minus 2. Let's try this one. Let's look at x squared minus 10x is equal to minus 9. All right, notice, let me go back. The first thing you have to do is you have to set it equal to 0. So notice here it's not equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the 9. I'm going to add 9 to each side. And I get x squared minus 10x plus 9 is equal to 0. Ah, okay. Now what two numbers multiply to positive 9 yet sum to negative 10? Pretty sure it's negative 9 and 1. So this is going to factor into x minus 9 times x minus 1 is equal to 0. So now you either have x minus 9 is equal to 0 or you have x minus 1 is equal to 0. I'm going to add 9 to both sides. So one solution is x is equal to 9 and another solution here when I add the 1 to each side, x is equal to 1. So you see here, like the hardest part here is just to factor, right? Like if you can factor this, boom, 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 it's pretty straightforward, okay? All right, let's try this last one here. Okay, so we've done some trinomials. Let me do another trinomial here. Let's look at 3x squared minus 7x minus 6 is equal to 0. All right, so notice how there's a value in front of the x squared. So you're going to have to do what I showed you was the AC method to factor. All right, so you're looking for two numbers, we'll call them m and n, such that they multiply to 3 times minus 6, they multiply to minus 18, and they sum to this middle term, minus 7. So what two numbers multiply to negative 18? Sum to minus 7, I think it's minus 9 and 2. Yeah, minus 9 times 2 is 18. Minus 9 plus 2 is minus 7. So you're going to split the middle term. And then you're just going to factor by grouping. You're going to group the first two together. Greatest common factor here is a 3x. So when you factor out a 3x, you're just left with x minus 3. Greatest common factor here is 2. They both have an x minus 3, so I'm going to factor that out. And then you're just left with 3x plus 2. Okay, so notice you have something times something equals 0. So you either have x minus 3 is equal to 0, or you have this 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. I'm going to add the 3 over here, so one solution is x is equal to 3. This is a two-stepper, right? So you're going to have to subtract 2 from each side and then divide by 3. So your solutions here, you have x is equal to minus 2/3, and I'm going to do comma or 3. So I'm just going to show it with the comma there. So those are the two solutions here. So the key here is just factor, 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 and then once you got it factored, then you'll be able to use this zero product rule here, this zero product principle. All right, class. So I hope this helps seeing these, and I'm going to follow this lecture up now with some more. I'll go back and I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to have another video for the square root property, completing the square, and then the quadratic formula.